Greta Van Fleet is a really interesting band. There are only two SNL music performances that I remember sticking around to watch live. One was, of course, Paul Simon, and the other was Greta Van Fleet. Typically, the live music section of SNL I deliberately avoid because it's not very good, and it's always the dumbest, most mainstream artist that's trying to push, like Future, Katy Perry, or whatever. The SNL live shows haven't been good since the 90s. But Greta Van Fleet came on stage and performed their classic hard rock, and I was fucking hooked. I was like, this band sounds fucking awesome. But then I looked on the internet, and everyone had a bone to pick with Greta Van Fleet. The really predictable reaction to Greta Van Fleet's music is that they're just a ripoff of Led Zeppelin. They sound too much like Led Zeppelin. They just sound like classic hard rock, and that style of music is too old-fashioned, and we should leave that in the past and be more innovative. And that Greta Van Fleet isn't innovative. Today, I'd like to take a more nuanced look towards the whole situation and be less dismissive of Greta Van Fleet, because I think Greta Van Fleet is, hands down, one of the best bands of the 2010s, and I think their existence says something about the current state of rock as a genre. Greta Van Fleet's albums, Anthem of the Peaceful Army and From the Fires, have been widely dismissed and criticized by people as shallow recreations of Led Zeppelin's sound, particularly the vocalist. This guy sounds a ton like Led Zeppelin. Now, I think to prove my point here about just how great Greta Van Fleet is, I'm going to have to compare Greta Van Fleet to another retro-style band, that being King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Whereas Greta Van Fleet dabbles in the field of classic hard rock, a la Led Zeppelin, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, ostensibly, is a retro-style psych rock band, attempting to capture the style of Donovan or Jefferson Airplane or acts like that from the late 1960s, whereas Greta Van Fleet has a more early 70s type edge. Greta Van Fleet's music is dismissed as artificial, sterile, devoid of innovation or thought, and too gimmicky. Their album covers are dismissed as too gimmicky, their music videos are dismissed as too gimmicky, and yet in every single Greta Van Fleet comment section you can find a bunch of old 50-year-old boomers talking about how great this music is, how it rocks, how these three young guys are rocking out, how they're so cool and fun and awesome, and how they wish there was more music like this. And personally, I can sympathize with that sentiment. I think the modern rock scene is missing fun rock. There isn't that much rock that's fun to jam to anymore. Rock is in a weird place right now. Weezer has gotten split personality disorder between their Pinkerton side and their Blue Album side, and the fan base is completely down the middle on which version of Weezer they want, so Weezer has just become sterile pop. The Red Hot Chili Peppers aren't really doing anything new. Rock is in a weird spot right now, and rock is being done out by the competition. Hip-hop is driving rock's face right into the ground. Currently, hip-hop is such an innovative genre, with groups like Brockhampton and Tyler the Creator and Kendrick Lamar all bringing hip-hop to a new golden age, that rock seems outdated and archaic by comparison. This is why, in this climate, bands like Greta Van Fleet have risen up, because there really isn't anything new in rock, and trying to create something new in rock is a long way off. People have a tough time creating something new in rock, and maybe to create something new, you first have to revisit the staples and fundamentals of the genre. I'm sure that if there wasn't so much innovation in hip-hop going on right now, we'd probably see a bunch of retro hip-hop acts all trying to sound like Slick Rick. It just so happens that hip-hop currently is more innovative than rock, and hip-hop albums on average sound more fresh and new and cool than the average rock album. But one thing is for sure, Greta Van Fleet sounds cool. They might not be the most innovative, They might be old-fashioned, they might not sound on the cutting edge, but not every rock album needs to be Bjork. And for some boomers who don't want rock that sounds like LCD Sound System or the White Stripes, both of which are fantastic bands but definitely don't have the cutting edge of Led Zeppelin, I get why people would want rock like that. Who wouldn't want a song that sounds like Immigrant Song or Led Zeppelin 3 or Physical Graffiti or any of those great Led Zeppelin classics? If you're going to imitate a rock band, I'd much rather hear a band that's imitating Led Zeppelin than hear a band that's poorly imitating LCD Sound System. Greta Van Fleet, I think, sounds great. They don't sound that innovative or boundary pushing. There's nothing in their albums or songs that you listen to and you go, wow, that's new. But you do go, wow, this is a fucking jam. These guys are fucking losing their shit over here and rocking out. Why don't I feel this enthusiastic about rock music anymore? It almost makes you kind of depressed because these guys have so much fun with their music and they don't give a shit about what anyone says and they'll just keep sounding like Led Zeppelin. Some people say they don't sound like Led Zeppelin, that they can tell the difference, because it's not like Greta Van Fleet is a cover band of Led Zeppelin. They make their own original songs. It just so happens they sound a lot like Led Zeppelin. And if you can hear the difference, then good for you. You have really good ears. I personally can't, but I personally don't care. If there was a band that came along that sounded just like AC/DC, I'd be like, fuck yeah, more AC/DC and less of this fucking Machine Gun Kelly bullshit.
Rap God, I'm the rap devil.
I'd rather have a band that sounds like AC/DC or Led Zeppelin over Machine Gun Kelly. I'd honestly much rather Greta Van Fleet be the future of rock music than Machine Gun Kelly, if you catch the drift. Please, please, please. So I'm going to be comparing Greta Van Fleet to King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard is a psych rock group from Australia. Right off the bat, psych rock from anywhere except America comes off as disingenuous and phony. Because the only reason psych rock exists, the only reason the hippie countercultural movement of the 1960s existed, was because of the Vietnam War, which Britain and Australia didn't fight. So when Britain shamelessly ripped off the hippie aesthetic and discarded all the racial and gender issues that came along with it in favor of the swinging London, colorful Austin Powers bullshit, came off as really disingenuous. And obviously, a lot of British people just wanted to appear forward-thinking without retaining any of the progressive mores that are vital to the American 1960s countercultural movement. And that's how you get Austin Powers, a goofy nerd who just pretends to be forward-thinking and cool and hip, but actually he just wants to bang as many women as possible.
She's the village bicycle. Everyone's had a ride.
And he's hopelessly outdated and stuck in the past. Now obviously this is how King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard comes off. You might think it's odd that I insist that my psych rock be American or I won't take it seriously, but then again, consider the following. Why is it acceptable for other countries to shamelessly rip off American forms of art like psych rock? After all, if you saw some white chicks at Bonnaroo doing Inuit throat singing, you'd regard that as cultural appropriation, wouldn't you? Because that's not their culture. So why is it okay when King Giz comes along and does this whole psych rock we're a bunch of hippies routine, even though back in the 1960s, all Australia was doing was shooting a bunch of kangaroos? Like, what's up with that?
Greta Van Fleet, what a bunch of disingenuous posers. I mean, they're an American rock band that sounds way too much like a British rock band who built their entire career around blatantly ripping off American blues standards. Americans don't get to make rock anymore, that's yesterday's news. These guys have probably never even listened to the best rock album of all time, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band. Here we go, here's some real rock shit, King Giz. These Australian guys pretending like they're American hippies from the late 1960s aren't posers at all. You can tell these guys are a real rock band because they all look like Mac DeMarco's cousin, and they have two drummers, unlike all those other poser rock bands that only have one drummer. They're so gosh dang quirky, they're practically the Zooey Deschanel of bands. No posers here.
That's not to say Britain doesn't have its own unique cultural movements. For instance, when I listen to Mick Jones or The Clash or something like that, I'm like, yeah, this is British, because the punk scene in the 1980s seems genuine. It doesn't seem like this forced artificial aesthetic, this gimmick that they're just using for their own personal gain and to look cool. It seems like, wow, you actually care about the monarchy and societal problems and police brutality and the oppression of the people. I listen to British punk music from the 1980s, I go, yes, this is a real social movement. This has a reason to exist. This is epic rock right here. And it's the same with psych rock from the late 1960s. Jefferson Airplane, Frank Zappa, and the like. Fantastic fucking albums. And I take psych rock seriously. So when I see King Gizzard putting on a psych rock veneer and being like, we're the next big thing in psych rock, you bet I'll take them at their word. And if they don't live up to my standards, I'm not going to take them seriously. Does Greta Van Fleet actually sound like 70s hard rock? Yes, 100% beyond the shadow of a doubt. You can listen to any fucking Greta Van Fleet tune, Highway Tune, When the Curtain Falls, any of those. They sound fucking awesome, rip-roaring good time straight through. Does King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard sound like actual late 1960s psych rock? Fuck no. None of this shit sounds even remotely like Jefferson Airplane or Donovan or The Doors or Frank Zappa or any of it. It doesn't sound like psych rock at all. It sounds like hipster shit. A really weird criticism that I hear leveled against Greta Van Fleet and retro bands in general all the time is that they're racist. Because if you like old music, that makes you a racist. And if you think rock and roll should sound like rock and roll, that means you're a big racist.
Again, it's not simply that these bands and artists are influenced by older music, we all are. It's that they often hold conservative and reactionary values and thoughts that often come out as, and I'm just gonna say it, contempt for women, LGBTQ+, and POC musicians.
But consider the following. 70s hard rock, like the type that Greta Van Fleet attempts to capture, is actually a more racially diverse genre than modern-day hipster psych rock, because none of the King Giz and the Liz Wiz boys or Tame Impala or Animal Collective are exactly the most racially diverse bunches around, if you catch the drift, whereas 70s hard rock has Jimi Hendrix, who's a fucking legend. So, on that front, I would argue that attempting to sound like Led Zeppelin or something is actually way more racially diverse and way more eclectic and way more interesting and shows that you're open to more perspectives than engaging in modern-day hipster psych rock that doesn't even sound like psych rock. And come to think of it, most late 1960s psych rock wasn't exactly the most racially diverse either. Hard rock, generally, is a more racially diverse genre than whatever King Giz is trying to encapsulate. On King Giz's Spotify page, it directly compares them to Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, which is a fucking hilarious claim, because these guys are nowhere near as funny or observant or witty as Frank Zappa ever was, and that's an insult to Frank Zappa's legacy and memory. It also claims that King Giz literally stands shoulder to shoulder with some of the best psychedelic rock ever made. You mean to tell me that King Gizzard is literally up there with fucking Jefferson Airplane in terms of the best psych rock ever made? As if anything King Giz has ever produced is on the same level as White Rabbit. You mean to tell me this, Spotify? Then again, Spotify does classify Donovan as psychedelic rock, even though Donovan is technically psychedelic folk, so I don't think Spotify knows much about genres in general. The problem with King Giz is that if they were just honest and called themselves an innovative, new type, boundary-pushing band that tries new things all the time, I wouldn't have this issue. Because they do try a lot of new shit. And it all sounds terrible. It all sounds like it's played through a TikTok filter that absolutely didn't exist in the late 1960s. But at the very least, if they defined themselves as this out-there boundary-pushing group, I might not call them out for not living up to the expectations set by classic psych rock. but they do classify themselves as psych rock, and they are legitimately horrible at capturing that sound. If you're going to say you're psych rock, you have to actually sound like psych rock. You can't just do everything. King Giz has tried to do everything. They've made an album called Quarters, which is like 4 albums in one. They've made one called Nonagon Infinity that you can listen to forever, theoretically, front to back and side to side and every which way. They made one called Flying Microtonal Banana, which has microtones. You mean to tell me that Greta Van Fleet is gimmicky just because they try to look and sound like Led Zeppelin, but King Giz isn't gimmicky when they do a different fucking gimmick for every one of their albums, and they try to make all their albums sound so fucking different and never really succeed because they all have the Australian accents on them, which are way less cool than the Led Zeppelin voice. When the curtain falls, that's epic. But King Giz is like, Mad Dog Morgan, I got a billabong, and he was in the outback, and he was a criminal. You know, I guess everyone has different tastes, but I for one prefer rock that sounds like cool. To each their own, I guess. Believe it or not, I mean, psych rock is a very experimental genre. It's weird, and while I don't personally engage in it, I define what I do as Denver New Wave. I have a lot of affinity for psych rock. I listen to a ton of psych rock on a regular basis. I got Jefferson Airplane on tape. So when I hear someone call themselves psych rock and then they fail to live up to being psych rock by any definition of the term, I'm willing to call bullshit on that. King Giz has an album called Infest the Rat's Nest where they try to perform death metal. And needless to say, I'm not a death metal expert, but I have consulted several actual death metal experts, and this stuff doesn't exactly live up to Cannibal Corpse. With song titles like Organ Farmer, Self-Immolate, or Hell. Yes, they just have a metal song called Hell, and they expect actual metal fans to take this seriously as a really great metal album that everyone should be listening to.
No posers here.
Not only that, but King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard has an extremely convoluted mythos, referred to by fans as the Gizverse, which is basically, there's this protagonist, and there's also a wizard and castles and shit, but the main thing that caught my eye is that there's a character who's just Satan. King Giz just includes Satan in their mythos, and expects me to take them seriously. Now I get Satan's inclusion if they were like a metal band or something, because Satan shows up in metal songs, but you can't be a psych rock band and expect me to take you seriously if you're like, look at our new character, guys. He's called the Devil. We made him up. Aren't we imaginative? To be taken seriously as an actual psych rock act, you have to come up with worlds and expansive cosmic things and cool shit for me to latch onto, like Jefferson Airplane or Frank Zappa did. But I really don't see that going on with King Giz, where they're literally just like, hey, Satan's in our universe. Hey, here's an idea. Make up your own fucking god. Make up your own fucking deity or character. Make up your own shit. Stop just putting Satan and God in everything and expect people to take you seriously as imaginative or creative, because it's not imaginative or creative. It's fucking lame. My main problem with the Gizverse is that it ruins the premise of concept albums. Like, imagine if The Wall was this incoherent and vague and nobody could actually make any sense of it. You had to dedicate entire Reddit threads to it. Like, oh, we're gonna make The Wall. Who knows what it's about? Satan something, something something castle, something something wizard. You know, I prefer concept albums that have a coherent narrative. Call me old-fashioned, but I like actual writing. The issue is that all the King Giz songs don't actually have a coherent narrative. They're just fucking nonsense that's tossed out there. I'm going to read some King Giz lyrics for you and tell me that this is better than what Greta Van Fleet produces. Oh, the way we rap it is wrong. Oh, the way we rap it is wrong. Fuck all of that plastic wrapped up in my dinner. It's not fantastic. It's gonna come and kill us. It's gonna be massive. It's gonna be brutal. Death will come from plastic. Death will come from people. Hey guys, did you know that plastic is bad and fills up the ocean and you shouldn't use plastic wrap? Golly gee, I've never heard this shit before. This is a new one on me. Wow, King Giz, you sure are sharing new ideas with me here that I've never heard or thought of before. Like, imagine if Jefferson Airplane had a song that blunt and forward, and just without even the slightest hint of subtlety. Even Vietnam War anthems actually have subtlety. Like, Stop What's Going Down, for what it's worth, actually has subtlety. That song is actually pretty subtle. If you didn't listen to it really closely, you wouldn't know it's about the Vietnam War. Because they had subtlety back then. They had real songwriters who didn't just go, hey, did you know plastic's bad? It's going to be massive, and it's going to come and kill us, and it's not fantastic. Rhyming plastic with fantastic. Holy shit, King Gizzard, you truly are wordsmiths. But I can tell that just by your name alone. It has 3 words that rhyme. You're totally not just a fucking novelty joke gimmick band. Here's another of their fantastic poetries in action here. Underestimated technology. I'm addicted to tablet screens. No escaping battleground PUBG. Computer games ain't for me. Can't relate face to face with modern day youth. Outdated, the post-millennial will get you. I was born in the echo boom, yet I rust as the cruel millennial. I was only born in 92, yet I rust as the cruel millennial. White dog shit, not on my nature strip, calcium bone conspiracist. Berenstein Bears read to his kids, it's a glitch in the Matrix. Wow, King Giz, I've never heard this fucking overhyped Berenstain Bears bullshit before. You truly have opened my third eye. I'm sure that if a stupid concept like that existed in Frank Zappa's time, he'd take it so seriously and wouldn't pick it apart relentlessly and make fun of it like the total badass he is. He'd just make a song about it, taking it at complete face value. Wow, King Giz, you really are covering whole new grounds here that have never been talked about before. This Berenstein Bears shit, that's some obscure shit. You gotta go on Reddit to find that. Like, maybe the reason millennials aren't taken seriously and are disliked by both the generations younger than them and the generations older than them is because they come off as really self-centered to be like, we're the last generation that remembers the good old days before the internet. Now, call me newfangled, but I think the internet is a pretty good thing in general, and I can't imagine living in the time where you just had to talk over the phone. I don't like talking over the phone. It's slow and annoying and doesn't get enough information across. I like email. I communicate via the internet. I'm a badass Gen Zer like that. Maybe the reason millennials aren't taken seriously is because they constantly whine and complain and self-aware shit like this, like, I'm a millennial, I'm a persecuted group, oh, I'm having such a rough time of it because I'm not young anymore and Gen Z is younger than me. And maybe the reason you're considered so annoying is because you act like it's some kind of sin for people to have been born after 9/11 and not remember 9/11 and not really care about 9/11. I wasn't alive for 9/11. I don't remember that shit. You might consider yourself young for being born in 1992, and that's okay. You're still pretty young, but I'm younger. I was born in 2002. Deal with it. You know, millennials? Just a thought. Wow, it's almost like I'm reading the lyrics of The Doors here. This is practically Jim Morrison tiers of wordsmithery and genius on display here. King Giz is doing such new things with the sound, such new things with rock. Dang, rock won't be seen as an outdated joke after profound shit like this. Here's their song, The Fourth Color, because nothing says progressive like spelling all your words with unnecessary U's that Americans dropped after the 18th century. I believe the hyperbole. I see the fourth color. Rising up out of my body, I am omnipresent for thee. Many fingers, many minds, and many eyeballs puppet my feet. I walk the streets holy. I am born again. I see the light. It's in my face. My brain is storing information. Now I am a god in a photon. I see through walls. I see your heat. I can see your terror. With sight, you can see the future. I am born again. I see the light. It's in my face. I am analyzing information. Now I am a god. Wow, it's like I'm reading the new Jefferson Airplane here. This is 100% on par with Grace Slick and the Great Society on this level. I'm tripping out here. This is wild, King Giz. You truly have opened my third eye here with these profound nonsense lyrics that mean absolutely nothing. The great thing about Greta Van Fleet, and the reason so many unpretentious people have gravitated towards them and not to King Giz, is because their lyrics are also just goofy nonsense, but they, unlike King Giz, are willing to admit it and say, yeah, we're just a rock band. We just sing about fast cars and girls, and that's all we do. And that's all we need to do. You don't need to do more than that. You don't need to have these crazy fucking gimmicks and concepts and everything. Rock should just be fun. It should just be hard-hitting guitar chords, and you just go crazy at it, and you just go for it. And you don't fuck around. Nonagon Infinity, now that I think of it, is kind of like a shitty ripoff of Giugotti, right down to the cover art. You have to wonder why it is that an American band from Detroit like Greta Van Fleet gets such an adverse reaction, whereas a hipster band like King Giz gets such a positive thumbs-up reaction from critics. Even competent critics like Anthony Fantano generally dismiss Greta Van Fleet. Although in his review of Greta Van Fleet's Anthem of the Peaceful Army, even he had to admit that the technical and instrument proficiency on display with Greta Van Fleet is on another fucking level, because obviously it takes an insane amount of talent to make a bunch of songs that sound like Led Zeppelin, and are as good as Led Zeppelin songs. I'm going to put up a picture right now of a guy from King Giz and a guy from Greta Van Fleet, and see if you can tell which is which, and also see if you can tell which one more looks like an actual rock star who's cool and awesome and knows how to have fun and party and have a great time, and which one looks like a try-hard hipster from Australia who doesn't know anything about rock history and probably has never listened to Jefferson Airplane in his entire frickin' life. Overall, I think the reaction Greta Van Fleet has had from the music world is very predictable. And one of the reasons people hate them so much is just because they don't give a fuck, because they're going to keep existing and keep being awesome no matter what anyone says. And personally, I think that's great, because I think America could use more rock bands, because rock is an American invention and was invented by Americans in the 1950s. And it wasn't invented by the Beatles, actually, contrary to popular belief. Hey, Editing Nicholas here. I just thought I'd pop in to mention that it might seem like this video is being unfairly mean to King Giz. I don't really care if you like King Giz, if you like King Giz, if you're a Giz head, if you're into the Giz-verse, all of that. That's fine. Whatever floats your boat. All I mean to do with this video is point out the ridiculous double standard we hold Greta Van Fleet to, the amount of shit they get. Meanwhile, King Giz is just given a free pass to do all this buffoonery. If there's one thing I really like, it's pointing out hypocrisy and double standards among the popular consensus. Anyway, I cited one of Nate's or Nate's videos, or however you pronounce it, earlier in the video. Go check out his channel. His channel's great. He's one of the best music critics here on YouTube. Criminally underrated. His videos are really good, even if I don't agree with his opinion that Greta Van Fleet is racist because they say you have to be smart to appreciate good music. Anyway, back to the video. I'm not exactly sure why it is that rock insists upon constantly being innovative and constantly being boundary pushing and constantly being pushed forward with new sounds and new shit all the time. Sometimes music should just be fun and cool. Sometimes music should just be nice to listen to. King Giz slaps so many fucking filters and weird shit on their music that absolutely did not exist in the 1960s in any form, that not only can it not be accepted as a believable artifact of that time and place, it doesn't even sound good. It doesn't even sound fun. You pop on a King Giz song at a party, nobody's gonna be having a fun time. It ain't party music. It's the type music you could only maybe really think is good when you're fucking stoned out of your gourd. But unfortunately, I don't do marijuana, so I have to listen to my music sober, and if it doesn't sound good, I'll notice. I think King Giz is much more of a joke than Greta Van Fleet because both are retro bands. The difference is that Greta Van Fleet is effective and has a passionate fan base of people who actually grew up with retro music and recognize its authenticity, and the other, King Giz, doesn't even remotely reflect the type of music it's trying to emulate in any way, shape, or form, and comes off as extremely inauthentic and gimmicky. And anyone who says otherwise, anyone who acts like King Giz is some kind of boundary-pushing, authentic form is lying to themselves, because the truth is, neither of these forms of rock are relevant anymore. They're not modern rock, they're not LCD sound system, so if you're doing them, you may as well do them correctly. Do them well, do them according to the rules and guidelines that have been set up by the forefathers. Pay respect and homage to those people. Don't just fucking toss them out and do your own thing and make a shitty death metal album because you're like, I'm gonna do what I want and every album is gonna be different. I'm gonna put out 5 albums in 1 year. Maybe be focused. Maybe pay attention to what came before you. Maybe take your time with things. Maybe put more effort into your shit and stop trying to capitalize on every gimmick and ride the hype train and be so fucking weird and crazy, and maybe just think about putting out a coherent piece of music, a competent body of work like Greta Van Fleet has done. There's nothing wrong with the Greta Van Fleet album. Is it boundary pushing? No. Does it need to be? No. Are they trying to be boundary pushing? No. For those of you who are watching this video and think I'm just shitting on psych rock, let me make myself clear. I fucking love psych rock. It's hands down one of my favorite genres. But the problem with psych rock is that even more so than the overall genre of rock, psych rock right now is in dire fucking straits when you've just got Tame Impala and King Gizzard as your representatives. Like, this shit is lame and boring and ass and does not sound at all like the classics of the 1960s. I'm going to give you psych rock fans a recommendation right now. So take this seriously, take this to heart. Once you click off this video, don't just go to the next thing. Do this. Look up Star Moles. Star Moles is hands down, I think, the best psych rock project today, and I don't mean that lightly. I may very well be the world's biggest Star Moles fan. Found out about Star Moles a couple years ago, and I have been hooked ever since. Star Moles is a small, extremely underrated psych rock group from the East Coast, and their music actually sounds, get this, like classic 1960s psych rock. Every single Star Moles song is a fucking banger front to back. Got songs like Rock and Roll Show, Ethelred the Unready, Danger Baby, The Old Man's House, and of course their magnum opus, Bloodhounds. Star Moles actually sounds good. Star Moles uses chord progressions and equipment that is accurate to the equipment and chord progressions you would hear in the 1960s. And more than that, Star Moles is just really fucking good music. This is why I don't use Spotify, because trash like King Giz is pushed up to the top and given hundreds and thousands of listens, and meanwhile stuff like Star Moles gets at the bottom and there's like a million little Star Moles all clamoring for attention. If you actually want to find something weird or out of the way, I'd suggest looking at YouTube, because YouTube's algorithm actually will push more weird stuff to you the more you look at weird stuff. Spotify doesn't do that. Spotify just recommends Kanye and Katy Perry and all the mainstream shit, and you stay on that forever. But if you click on just one weird song on YouTube, your entire feed will just be filled with weird shit. In fact, if it weren't for the YouTube algorithm, I wouldn't have found Star Moles to begin with, but I was recommended the Bloodhounds music video, and I have been a dedicated Star Moles fan ever since, dedicated to spreading the word of Star Moles, because holy shit, Star Moles is, I think, the savior of psych rock. It is hands down some of the best psych rock coming out today. What's really bizarre is that Star Moles has actually done a King Giz cover. That's right, Star Moles covered a King Giz song. And needless to say, the clash of styles is actually really jarring. Star Moles shouldn't be covering King Giz. King Giz should be covering frickin' Star Moles, because Star Moles sounds frickin' awesome. Star Moles is like such a freaking good psych rock band. And every time I hear Starmoles and listen to a Starmoles album front to back, and I just think, barely anyone knows about Starmoles. I feel like I'm going crazy here, because I know the best psych rock in the country, and barely anyone else does. No, not just the country, the freaking world. Starmoles is way better than anything in Australia or Britain or every continent. Starmoles is, for all intents and purposes, the best modern psych rock, hands down, because it actually sounds like psych rock and respects the conventions of the genre while still having a really cool new sound. I can't recommend Starmoles enough. I'm pretty sure I'm the world's biggest Starmoles fan. But needless to say, this entire debacle is just grown off the fact that right now, rock is in a weird place. It's only within the last decade that hip-hop exceeded rock as the most popular American genre. And that's obviously led to a big schism and rift, and rock currently is confused and doesn't know where to go. Doesn't know where it'll become, and doesn't know where it'll end up. It doesn't know where it came from or anything. It's clueless, and it doesn't have any nudges pointing it in the right direction, it seems. But I think the last thing rock would benefit from is shitting on groups like Greta Van Fleet, who sound great and are actually fun to listen to, and are a great example of rock as a genre. I would say that Greta Van Fleet stands shoulder to shoulder, so to speak, with the best hard rock. I wouldn't say that King Giz stands shoulder to shoulder with the best psych rock. That's fucking ridiculous. They absolutely do not. I wouldn't even really consider them psych rock. They're more just like hipster music, which is its own separate genre, and very distinct from any other genre. It's not an insult necessarily. I mean, I don't hate hipsters, but I do know the conventions of hipster music as a codified genre, and I think more people should. It's a pretty well-defined genre, and you know when you hear it. Yeah, overall, I think King Giz is an example of a really annoying, gimmicky band, and I think Greta Van Fleet is a great example of a kick-ass, cool, hardcore, epic, no-fucks-given band. There's not much else they could do to say to their critics, we don't give a fuck, than just keep rocking out and being totally badass and awesome like that. And maybe it comes off as artificial or fake, but I don't see how they're any more fake than King Giz. I think they're much less fake than King Giz. I think they actually seem like they care about rock music as a genre and like its direction and shit, and presenting it as a fun thing to listen to. Call me crazy, but I don't exactly think a band that brings up the fucking Berenstein Bears thing is to be taken seriously much as like the torchbearer of rock from here on out. I doubt AC/DC or Led Zeppelin would put that shit in a song if there was a contemporary equivalent that they had floating around.
That's right, I said Berenstain, not Berenstein.
You dumb bastard.
Anyway, that's all I really have to say about the subject. Just that Greta Van Fleet gets way too much shit for sounding like Led Zeppelin, even though sounding like Led Zeppelin is fucking awesome, because Led Zeppelin sounds fucking awesome, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if they never evolve or change their sound, I won't give a shit, because, personally, I like Led Zeppelin, and an album that sounds like Led Zeppelin, I'll also like. What I don't like is the state of rock where Glass Animals' Heat Waves is considered a rock song, and everyone considers that psych rock, even though it has a cover that looks like Vaporwave, because Glass Animals is trying to take advantage of as many trends as possible and just ride the hype train. Same goes, I think, for King Giz. I think King Giz is pure cringe, and listening to it is like listening to a fucking trash compactor. It's so unpleasant to listen to, and their music is just full of needless gimmicks and shit. I don't think music needs to always be the most innovative or crazy. Sometimes music can just be fun. And maybe that's why rock is falling behind, because hip-hop guys do have fun with their music. Brockhampton just goes at it. They don't give a fuck. They're just like, yeah, we're Brockhampton. We're out here, we're having fun, we're having a good time. Who cares? And if you adopt that attitude that music is just for fun, then maybe good music will just follow. But maybe if you're a rock hipster and you adhere to all these weird rules and tenets and you try to be King Giz with Nonagon Infinity and sketches from Brunswick East and all this hipster bullshit, maybe that's how rock dies. Maybe rock just needs to be fun again. Maybe it doesn't need to be innovative, maybe it just needs to be fun. There's a thought for the future of rock. Anyways, like I said, please do yourself a favor. If you're a psych rock fan, listen to Star Moles. I recommend Ethelred the Unready, Danger Baby, The Old Man's House, and basically just every Star Moles song. But those are some of my favorites, because Star Moles is such a great psych rock group, and they deserve way, way, way more exposure than King Giz. I don't get what it is about King Giz, but needless to say, I am not a King Giz fan, and I think any band that has 3 rhyming words in its name should not be taken seriously by music critics. But what do I know? I'm just some loser in a colorful scarf and hat and this disco light flashing in front of me, which isn't even psych rock related. Anyway, that's all for today's video. If you liked it, comment down below. If you disagreed with it, also comment down below and tell me what you thought of it and why I'm wrong and why King Giz is the most awesome and why Greta Van Fleet is a bunch of posers or whatever. I'm going to go eat now, but it's been fun. Sayonara, suckers.